Hi, my name is Mark Roberts. I'm a mechanical engineering major at BYU, and I chose to do my piece on Karl Marx. I was really interested in his work, and so I chose to write and talk about him. Drawing from previous philosophers and the circumstances created by the Industrial Revolution, Karl Marx followed the formula for historical analysis established by Hegel, but instead substituted his own idea of reality. His substituted view, which was based on material reality rather than mental reality, enabled him to further develop the idea of alienation that was explored by Hegel, and also enabled Marx to pioneer thought on the topics of economic structure, classes, freedom, and communism. Marx's ideas were revolutionary, and although he influenced later philosophers, his greatest impact may have been on politicians and dictators, as well as the continuing following that he even has today. One of the largest influences on Marx's ideas was the circumstance in which he lived. Born in 1818, Marx spent much of his life observing the new socioeconomic system of big business that was brought upon by the Industrial Revolution. Large corporations were beginning to develop goods in large quantities with the development of steam engines and industrial machines. Development of high production goods was very labor-intensive, creating the need for large numbers of unskilled workers to produce. Sorry. I'll just read the sentence again. Okay. Development of high production goods was very labor-intensive.
It's okay, just go ahead.
Okay. Development of high production goods was very labor-intensive, creating the need for large numbers of unskilled workers to produce these goods. This new demand for unskilled labor brought upon the Industrial Revolution. Dang it.
It's okay.
Sorry, you're going to have to cut this too many times.
No, don't worry. It's
okay.
Nothing. We're going to do that one.
Okay. This new demand for unskilled labor brought upon by the Industrial Revolution led Marx to develop ideas from a different perspective than previous philosophers. One of those previous philosophers, Hegel, was the teacher and mentor of Karl Marx. Influenced by his regard for history, Hegel developed the concepts of perpetual change and progression towards the goal of a conflict-free society. Hegel argued that history is simply a record of opposing forces battling within society, and that as one battle is resolved, another is immediately presented. This repeated pattern of tension and resolution is a natural process that moves society as a whole towards some common goal, which must eventually be a conflict-free society. For more information on Hegel, you can follow the link below to a video made by a BYU student. Marx began developing his ideas based on the work that Hegel had done, but based his thinking on a different perspective than Hegel. Both Hegel and Marx believed that reality was changing due to opposing forces, but while Hegel believed reality to be the product of mentality and spirituality, Marx believed...
It's okay, we can go a little bit, don't worry. Start with both Hegel.
Both Hegel and Marx believed that reality was changing due to opposing forces, but while Hegel believed reality to be the product of mentality and spirituality, Marx believed reality begins with material. On his differing perspective, Marx said, in direct contrast to German philosophy, which descends from heaven to earth, here we ascend from earth to heaven. Life is not determined by consciousness, but consciousness by life. Previous philosophers have questioned the reality of the physical world, saying that true reality is a state of consciousness or ideology, but Marx believes that reality is in fact what is right in front of you. Marx even takes material reality a step further by saying that reality is created first by the economic needs of men. Economic needs here refer not only to monetary systems, but instead to fulfilling the basic needs of human survival, such as food, shelter, clothing, etc. Marx says, the first historical act is thus the production of the means to satisfy these needs, the production of material life itself. This focus on material reality and economy led Marx to analyze the conditions of the Industrial Revolution that surrounded him, and he drew conclusions about the economic system of the time. In previous times, the worker was both a landlord and a laborer. The worker may own land and tools and use them with his own labor to create some value for himself. Although the completed work may have been for some monetary profit, the value was created in a craft or trade, and the worker was connected to his work. This relationship changed drastically during Marx's lifetime. Hold on just a sec. I feel a yawn, but it hasn't come out yet.
I hate it.
Okay. I'll just keep going.
All right.
As the Industrial Revolution progressed, the worker soon became the laborer, and a new type of individual was created, the capitalist. The worker no longer created value for himself, nor was he his own landlord. The capitalists owned the land, the tools, the creations, and essentially the worker. The worker was no longer creating value for himself, nor was the work he completed his own. Work became an external thing, where the value created was simply a paycheck and of no personal worth to the worker. Marx refers to this distant relationship as the alienation of the worker. For a good example of the alienation of the worker, see the videos linked to in the description below. As time marches forward, the divide between classes grows larger. These two opposing sides seem to Marx to be the opposing forces seen in all other previous time periods, as pointed out by Hegel. Marx defines these two classes within the economic structure as the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Defined as the class of owners, including capitalists and landlords, the bourgeoisie is fueled by greed, a feeling of entitlement and free trade. To Marx, free trade is in one word for exploitation, veiled by religious and political illusions. It has substituted naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. To the bourgeoisie, the worker has become a commodity, and thus is bought for as little money as possible. This reduction in pay, along with the alienation of the worker we discussed, contributes to Marx's point of exploitation and leads to his disdain of the bourgeoisie. The University of California recently published an intriguing study that demonstrates the mentality of members of the bourgeoisie, although it only refers to them as the upper class. There's a video and a link to the study in the description. The opposing side to the bourgeoisie, the proletariat, grows increasingly mindful of his standing as the oppressed, and with time will rise up and remove the oppressor from his position. This is a process that continues throughout history and pushes forward the building of tension and resolution between opposing forces, as noted by Hegel. The contrast seen in the bourgeoisie and proletariat begs the question, who is free? The bourgeoisie seems to be consumed by greed and competition, while the proletariat simply lacks the means to be free without oppression from the bourgeoisie. Marx suggests that freedom is actually dependent on the state of society as a whole, and that we have an incorrect notion of freedom. Freedom is not simply having the ability to make personal decisions, but is actually the collective ability of humans to control their destiny. With this definition of freedom, society continues to enslave itself by creating economic structures that force competition and essentially oppression. Marx's solution to freeing mankind is to remove the economic structure that creates oppression. In other words, Marx suggests that society dissolve the idea of capitalism and private property for one that puts all humans on an equal playing field with no ability or reason to try and advance. Communism. Communism is, basically defined according to Marx, removing the notion of personal property. Removing private property removes capitalism, and removing capitalism allows man to no longer be alienated from his work, because he is working to create value instead of commodities for the capitalist. Communism was the solution that was needed to break the structure of economic classes that restricted true freedom, the freedom of humanity as a whole. Marx's ideas on economic structure, divides in social classes, true meaning of freedom, and the implementation of communism were all ideas that are still prevalent and applicable. Marx's ideas on economic structure, divides in social classes, true meaning of freedom, and the implementation of communism are all ideas that are still prevalent and applicable in the world today. For a good example of Marxist observations and thought, one only need to look to the popular book series turned blockbuster, The Hunger Games. This trilogy, authored by writer Suzanne Collins, features a main character that lives an oppressed life and goes on a journey that clearly depicts the socioeconomic structure of a class divide that can only be defined as bourgeoisie and proletariat. The three books, The Hunger Games, Catching Fire, and Mockingjay, are thinly veiled as Marxist, even using terms like the capital to describe the place where the upper class lives, or capitalists, and Panem as the name of the country, which comes from a Latin root that references a society that is controlled by its entertainment and is not free by Marx's definition of freedom. The book can be purchased at any bookstore, and for a synopsis you can see the link below. We can see Marx's revolutionary ideas nearly 200 years later, but Marx believed that his ideas were powerful enough to change society in his own time. He admonished common men and philosophers alike to take action. Marx said, "The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it." Marx clearly targets previous philosophers for not acting, and intends to do so himself. In a later publication, the Communist Manifesto, Marx calls all men to do the same. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communistic revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries, unite. Marx's ideas and call to action were heard around the world. His ideas were more applicable to economic and social systems than any of his preceding philosophers, which may explain his following of politicians, dictators, social theorists, and revolutionaries. Vladimir Lenin is among the most influential of these politicians, and the combination of Marx and Lenin's ideas were taken to the extreme in their influence on Joseph Stalin, who tried to force the growth of communism to the point of mass murder in the former Soviet Union. Leon Trotsky is another influential theorist that drew from the ideas of Marx and was a major player in the Russian Revolution in the early 1920s. A revolutionary Marxist from another part of the world was Ernesto Che Guevara, Argentinian by birth and a major figure of the Cuban Revolution in the 1950s. It's clear that with his revolutionary ideas of material reality, alienation, economic structure, classes, freedom, and communism, Karl Marx influenced thinkers that came after him in a social change movement of unprecedented proportions. Che summarizes the power of Marx's ideas by saying that he produced a qualitative change in the history of social thought. He interprets history, understands its dynamic, predicts the future, but in addition to predicting it, he expresses a revolutionary concept. The world must not only be interpreted, it must be transformed.